Leg ich mich ein Bäum. 18 Jahre ist gestanden bei meinem Fenster und mit dem Neiger von einer Hundsnuss geforscht mit den schottenlichen Blättern in die Welt. Was tut sich nicht du? Sich eingehört zum Krechts vom Stuhl, zum Kreuz vom Pen. Etwas Neues auf dem Schreibtisch? Der Dachter hat nicht gedacht, von einem frischen Gramm, von einem gut gebeuteten Vers. Und am Morgen Spätnacht angeklappt ist schön. Geh schlafen, Jold. Es wird Zeit, gar nicht wieder rauskommen von dem. Zu Stunden von wann hat angeheben. Und der reisende gratis bei der Kellertreppe hat sie bewiesen. Ein Riegel mit einem kreuzigen Kopf. Ach, nur ihre gezitterten Wind. Wer war gefragt bei der Welt? Der Meg? Keinmal nur gewachsen in der Heich. Wenn der Gräb, Kapoeira, a Krieg auf der Geburt. Jeden Tag an einem Beug, an einem Heker. Mehr Zweigen, mehr Monster. Oktopus, die gebeugen und gebrochen haben sich. Stahl, Stein und Konkret. Dieser hat mir der Sehen im Fenster. Mir hat sein Leben vertreut. Von Eisen hat tiefer gelebt, als für maltisch flinke Kinderkletterei. Als für Hockens zu hängen Gret. Als für ungeschnitzte Männer Dattes und Herzlach. Albumen von jungen, unschuldigen Liebschaften. Jetzt, wenn ich gucke, seinen weißen Überbruch, mit dem safren gelben Rädel in der Mitte, kenne ich nicht, der Mann sich selber hat geblieben. Ich habe ihn gesehen in Jüdisch, wenn blaue Augen zusammenflecken, Beben befallen mit Melancholie. Weite der Nächte begehrt ein Krächzen in Frost. Schlecht nonnte, bitter ist mir. Ich habe ihn gesehen in Fried, wenn Aprilflecken verspritzten mit ein bisschen Nebachts. Beheuchen mit Diemens lichtiger Warmkeit. Aber ich habe geöffnet das Fenster und bin da feit in die Stube reingerissen. Mit Bindlach Bäs, Süßkeit mit ein Hartsaft. Alles für dir, nur aber keiner nicht. Aber für mich gewohnt seinen apokalyptischen Namen, von welchem Joder stammt, von welchem Gehenim oder Oasis. Jahre berechnen noch. Mit der allein, dann muss ich nicht ein Team von mir, mit ein dummes Haut. Zero. Ich habe einen Säger nicht angedreht, 2 Mahlzeiten verteilt und die Luike mit der Röse gelost vom Mäuel.
Good morning and welcome to People of the Book. Our guests today are Mr. Alter Esselin and his son, Mr. Joseph Esselin. My name is Herb Felsenfeld, and I direct the Cultural Arts Program for the Jewish Community Center of Milwaukee. On April 20th, we will have a program to honor Mr. Esselin for the 80th anniversary of his birth and also for the publication of his poems in English, translated by his son. Mr. Esselin has written 3 books of poetry which have been published in Yiddish, and this is the first time that his poems have been published in English. Welcome, Mr. Esselin. Joseph Esselin, welcome. Can you tell us, Joseph, something about the book?
Yes, well, it's not true. This is the first time his work has been published in English, but this is the first collection that has appeared.
Right.
There are many others who've done some translations, but these translations I worked on for a period of 15 years. The book was just published about 2 months ago, and it's published by a firm called Interface, and it's in Chicago, Post Office Box 1546, in case anybody would like to get a copy.
And what's the price of the book?
$2.50. There are 53 poems. I don't know what that works out per poem, but I think it's worth it.
It would be interesting, Joe, I think, for our audience to hear you read one of your father's poems, and I thought perhaps autobiographic would be an interesting poem to start with. It is characteristic, I think, of your father's work, and it can also give us some idea of his life. And
yeah, as the title would indicate, autobiographic. While others were learning from rows of books, civility, fine manners, the glory of nations, and names of the stars, Life was preparing a tribal gift for me. A back like an ox to carry a heavy destiny, hands as hard as oak, and a fine feeling for iambics and rhyme. In my 8th year, I was wholly familiar with pangs of hunger and wounds in the soul, and as memory of homeland can never be numb, how well I recall how we guarded every crumb. Salt, codfish, and bread washed down with water. Small as I was, already a tormented sea-all hero. Tears of my mother, how clear through the years. Sighs of my granddad at his yellowed Gemara. And children so sickly, blistered and bitten. In me, a dog's loyalty, and the gentleness of a kitten. And a blonde peasant girl, gooseberry-eyed. What I tell not my mother, to her I confide. In an attic where doves are working, there still lies my theft, a book by Gorky. In the margin this note, oh God help me, someday I too shall write poems like these. But to me has been dealt a fate like Lear's, a darkened throne room at the abyss edge, and nowhere for the king to take his stance. My misery speaks, my bitterness shrieks. Along with thousands down here I sit, in the gutter where everyone may spit, and thence my muse and song of romance.
How old were you, Mr. Esselin, when you wrote this poem?
I must have been about
40.
I wrote that in 1931. That was the time of the crisis. There were many American fine citizens were on counter relief.
You too.
Me included.
And you wrote that in Milwaukee?
That's where I point out to that the ice
In the gutter.
in the gutter where everybody can speak. There were so many people, there was no work to the gang. They were just leaving them out there leave.
It would be interesting, I think, for our audience, Joe, to look at Mr. Esselin's life in terms of some of the pictures that we have of him.
Yes.
And perhaps you can fill us in on the details.
Yes. I think that the poem itself tells more than maybe I could do in much longer terms. But he was born in Russia, in Chernigov, in Ukraine, and he was the eldest of 5 children. He was orphaned. His father died when he was 10. That put a stop to his formal education. He had to go to work because there just wasn't any money in the house. And he was apprenticed as a carpenter. When he finished his apprenticeship, he came to the United States. He was then a boy of around 17. He lived for a while in New York, then in Norwich, Connecticut, and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And he began to wander. I think we have a picture that shows him about the time when he
Well,
was...
how old were you when this wandering started?
He was about 20.
Or about a little over 20, about
We have a picture.
19 to
just about-
21.
Yes.
Right.
And during the time that he was wandering across the country in dozens of towns, he would work for a month or a week or 2 months, get a little money, then he would spend his time in the library and read voraciously all the books on the shelves. And it was at that time that he became enamored and intrigued by the work of some Yiddish poets, Meshuab Halper and most especially. And he began to try to emulate that, and started sending his poetry to Yiddish daily newspapers. There were such things, and they published original poetry.
Where were these papers published?
Well, there was one in Detroit called Vague, long since gone. And in fact, the picture that you see there is of him at the time he began writing his poetry.
Yeah.
He started to appear in Kundus. That was a newspaper published
It
in
was
New York.
a weekly paper.
Yeah.
And how old were you at this time, Mr. Esselin?
About 29.
30, 31, yes.
No?
And then when your work started to appear regularly, you moved to Chicago,
Right.
and you became part of that literary life that was
The young
very
poets of
active
Chicago,
in
sure.
Chicago. There were dozens of Yiddish poets then.
Yeah.
And you met my mother there,
1922.
and then you moved to Los Angeles for a time.
That's right.
And it was when you were living there that you won the literary prize that made you established. That was for the poem Proletariat.
That's right.
And we have a picture of him just in that year, 1924.
That's right.
And how old are you having now?
Let's see, he'd be about
When you won the prize?
35.
35.
Yes.
35.
And shortly after that, my parents moved back to the Midwest and settled in Milwaukee. And
1925.
Yes, and from
Ever
then on,
since.
we lived here.
Mm-hmm.
And it was here that the first book was published. That was Knighton.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a picture of a banquet on the occasion of that publication.
And you're in there too.
Yes, I'm in the sailor suit on my mother's lap. And it was in that sailor suit, I remember, I recited one of the poems that's in this book, Isla Lou. It was a lullaby.
Which is
first,
also, it's also translated
yes,
in your book.
it's in here.
Yes.
And the first poem I ever learned. The second book was published in 1936.
36.
Yes, Unter der Last.
Under the yoke.
Under the Yoke.
Correct.
And then the third book, Lieder von der Midburnik, was published in 1954. And it was for that book that he won the Harry Kovner Memorial Award as the best book of Yiddish poetry of that year. It's a very,
That's
significant.
a yearly award for the good,
Right.
for the best in Yiddish.
And he went to New York and he received the prize there. And
Lieder von der Midburnik,
that's songs of a hermit, yes, poems of a hermit.
And the poems that are in your book now, the book that you've translated, are they culled from the three books?
Yes, there's some from all three. And then, in fact, there are some that aren't in any of them. There are a few of the poems have been written
after the
since then.
publication.
Yes. So it's representative of his whole career.
I see. Of course, it's the poems, Mr. Esselin, that we're interested in, and I think our audience would be interested in hearing you read the poem that we originally heard in Yiddish, Elegy for a Tree, in English.
I see. All right. Elegy for a Tree. 18 years he stood beside my window. With the curiosity of a dog's nose, he probed with his shadowing leaves at the walls. What's going on there? He listened for the scratch of my pen, the creak of my chair. Something new on your desk? Often I felt that he rejoiced with me over a freshly coined rhyme or a well-built stanza. And sometimes late at night, he tapped at my window. Go to sleep, fool. Nothing will come of it anyway. How amazing was it, the place where he began. From under iron grating near a cellar stair. He had emerged, a slender, sapling with one bud as a cap, humbly trembling in the wind, as if he were asking of the world, may I? He never grew at all in height, only in breadth, contrarily, a cripple from birth. Each year a new ball, a new deformity, more branches, more monster. Octopus-like he bent and broke around him steel, stone, and concrete, until he saw me through the window. He entrusted his life to me. And after the iron had been overcome, there were so many monkey-quick climbing children, so many hooks holding long lines of laundry, so many carved names, dates, and little hearts, albums of innocent young loves. And now, when I look at the shattered whiteness of his broken trunk, with the saffron yellow ring in the center, I can hardly remember that he ever bloomed at all. I saw him in despair, when the blue silk evening enfolds us both in melancholy. In wide deep nights, I will hear him sighing through the frost. It goes badly for me, near one. I saw him in joyous mood, when April besprinkled him with life, breathing upon him diamond bright warmth. As I would open the window, he would blow in a breath of lilac sweetness from his heart core. All for you, I have no one else. I never even knew his taxonomic name, or from what genus he came, from which Gehenna, which oasis. 18 years, just think, not only his, but a great portion of my life. With one thunderclap, 0. Today, I haven't wind my watch. I skipped 2 meals and never took the pipe from my mouth.
Interesting also to note that the picture that we had was also the picture of the tree.
That's the very tree, yes.
And when was that picture taken, do you know?
I think it was around 1935, around the time when the poem was written.
Before the book was published.
Where was the house?
It was on 10th and Lloyd. There's nothing there anymore. The tree, too. Well, the tree died long before then.
I can see that you love that tree.
Yes, that's how Rappaport talks about it.
Yes.
Did you notice?
We have in...
remarked it.
Rappaport has remarked on that, and I also noticed that Nella Kravich, in the translation of the poems, Joe has put in an introduction which is very interesting and contains much critical comment on Mr. Esselin's work. Nella Kravich says, Alter Esselin is one of the most authentic Yiddish poets, a person-to-person poet, a refined primitive. All of the poetic tricks and devices appear in his work with the greatest of ease, as if somebody else were doing it. Writing of this sort can only be done by one who is either a consummate master of all secrets of poetry, or one to whom God has given great poetic talent, endowed him with full pockets of poetic gold, and not even told the recipient about what has been given, so that when he takes out a nut from his pocket, it is pure gold. Alter Esselin is an astonishingly good poet. The interesting element in the title of the book is also something I thought we could comment on. Under the Yoke, and the use always of natural words, of real words.
It's an elemental, deeply felt experience. I think that the characterization of Rappaport, that also in the introduction, that it is characteristic of all of his poems that they are clearly the outcome of something that he has lived through.
Yes. Rappaport mentions here, Alter Esselin does not belong to that category of our writers to whom writing is an occupation, a trade. Those who busy themselves with writing for the world and for fame. But they themselves could get along without it. In reading Esselin's work, one has the strong impression that his written poems are just a small portion of the poems he has lived through. It is for this reason that one must respect Esselin's strong poetic voice, and one feels actually his enjoyment of the bitter-sweet drink that poetry is from reading his poetry. Bitter-sweet drink.
Well, you know, as a child, I can recall vividly that his conviction about what he was doing was conveyed to me, because he was very mysterious to me. He would go off in the morning and he'd be gone, he'd be at work. He would come home tired from his work as a carpenter, and then he would sit at his desk, and I would ask my mother, what's he doing? And she would say, schreibt, he's writing. So I had the notion, I'm sure it was understandable, that all fathers came home and they wrote poetry in the evening. And I formed the conviction that everybody starts out wanting to be a poet, and it's only when they find out that they can't be that they try something else. I still think that today.
I'd like to talk, Joe, about the book and what the process of translation was. What atmosphere did you work in? How did you work with your poet?
It's precisely the atmosphere that you find here. It was over kitchen table and over many cups of coffee, and it was very much a collaboration. We worked at these poems together. It's been something like 15 years that we've been working at it really systematically, but I think all my life I had intended to do something of this sort. And it was with his help that I think the poems have been translated so that they have the quality almost of seeming to be originals, although, you know, as they say, poetry was lost in the translation. I think it may still be true.
But it was in the house
Yes.
that you worked, and that's very interesting. And also, I think the house and your father's work has pervaded the poetry. It's pervaded the work. I know, Mr. Esselin, that you have prepared something about your work and about your life. I think it would be interesting for our audience to hear what you have to say about your life and your work.
A tasted phrase by Maxim Gorky keeps on poking in my memory. I remember every word in his own language, that is in Russian. Я оратора мочи скверный. Не надо читать, а не слушать. Meaning, you should read what I write instead of listening to my speeches, because I'm a pretty bad orator. Not that I compare myself to Gorky, but it just fits to me exactly what he said.
Yes.
I'm not a good speaker. If only there were enough time, there is a lot that I could tell you about myself and my work. Don't forget that I'm already an octogenarian. A lot of years for one man. Not enough maybe for one who has joy in life. And maybe too many for someone who lives very trains all the time. I must tell you, my life wasn't fully packed with honey and roses either. It wasn't always easy to be a carpenter by day and a poet by night. It wasn't always pleasant to be writing poetry for many years without being noticed by a sympathetic eye, and without the hope of recognition. I must confess, there were days of disappointment. Being most of the time far from the Yiddish center, the culture, and writers and colleagues, it often seemed to me that I was writing poetry for myself.
I have a picture of myself.
Yeah. I have a picture of myself as a somnambulist, walking in his dream, a dangerous walk. I knew what I wrote and I knew what I meant, but I did not know who needs it beside myself. And yet, after all the tribulation I went through, I say that if I had to live my life again, I would gladly do this same. Why? Because there is so much of hidden joy in writing poetry, even without readers. The hidden sadness of a genuine sonnet, at times even one line of it that penetrates the heart of the poet is so great that no power can prevent him from creating poetry. And that's why I didn't give up. I kept and writing, as the saying goes, in all kinds of letters. Until the unexpected consolation came slowly but effectively. The persona gratis among the Yiddish writers, or critics rather, began to write about me favorably. Some of them proclaimed me as a poet of depth and originality. I have been awarded prizes even for a single poem. And what more can a poet wish, even a great one? The bargain is mine. Deep in my heart, I doubt whether I am that great a poet. But I am not arguing with them. They might be right, who knows? I waited a long time for this, or for less than this.
Thank you. We have time for one last poem, and I would like you, Mr. Esselin, to read the final poem from your book, Consolation Comes Late in English.
I'll do it gladly. Consolation comes late. Late at night, the silence of the pen, the polished beauty of a stanza, will more than once lead your spirit astray. Like a desert wandering entrenched by chimeras, you will see how impetuously Pegasus flies with his laurel wreath for your heroic song, to be sung at Sabbath, holiday, and Monday. The deepest secrets, which no one has ever known, will like bubbles mirroring the sun, shine thousandfold bright in basil clay, and suddenly darken and